So let's talk a little bit about conflict and struggle. So the typical paradigm which most of us live by, which is the belief in being this, the separate body-mind entity, uh, the body-mind as an entity independent of and separate from the cosmos as a whole. The unconscious belief that most of us hold, described as I just described, is a path of perpetual, continuous, unceasing conflict and struggle. If you just look back at your life, you'll see that this is true. Get up in the morning, fight traffic to get to school or to work, wherever it is that you go. Face the struggles of school or work or whatever it is that you're engaged in. Study for examinations, attend lectures, give examinations. You're in a state of continuous resistance and tension because you're never okay with what is at this moment. Your fulfillment or happiness always seems to lie in the future. And this is because of the fundamental error of reducing the infinite to something finite. You reduce the cosmos itself, which is boundless, limitless, never ending, beginningless, endless, infinite, beyond even the concept of infinity, sacred, perfect. And the universe, which is all of these things, we reduce it to the body and the mind. And therefore, we reduce the infinite to the finite, to the imperfect. And this imperfection we are peripherally aware of, and therefore we live in a state of perpetual dissatisfaction because within us is cosmic memory, memory of perfection, memory of our stellar, celestial, otherworldly origin. So, the first belief in separation occurs when we become aware of the body, and that happens at the age of around 2 or 3, when the self concept first arises, the concept of I as something seemingly separate from what is around me. The baby has no sense of separation from its surroundings until around the age of 2 or 3, when it starts being more aware of its own existence and starts and learns and has learned over the last few years, 2 or 3 years, that it causes subtle changes in its environment via its words and actions. That is the birth of the ego, which then grows ceaselessly until a very long time, until much later, because your entire life, as soon as you become aware of the ego, becomes focused on keeping the ego sated or satisfied. So now, as we discussed, we've in believing that we are the body and the mind, we've reduced our true essential identity of being inseparable from the cosmos to something separate, vulnerable, limited, and weak, which is just the body and the mind, subject to the ruthless forces of nature. So the two basic modes of being of the apparent imaginary separate body mind identity of fear and desire. So the fear is of losing yourself, of death, of vulnerability, because the body and the mind are very fragile entities if you are identified with them. Body is a mere speck which can easily be crushed by the forces around. The mind is basically driven by emotions at an early age. And emotions, as we know all too well, are supremely volatile and fragile. They are heavily dependent upon the response that the world gives you, and that is invariably hostile at times. So, the separate body mind identity lives in a state of constant fear, fear of reduction, fear of disappearance ultimately. And on the other hand, the other basic condition of being identified as a separate entity is desire, because you've reduced your infinite and perfect true nature to finitude and imperfection, which causes the attraction or the impulse towards the true and original nature of infinity and perfection. It's like you pull a spring, certain forces accumulated in the spring, and when you let the spring go, it snaps back into equilibrium, into its original position. So, the unnatural identification with an apparently separate and imaginary, in fact, body mind identity creates a sort of pull back towards our infinite and perfect and eternal true nature, which is what we call desire, basically. So, fear and desire are the two consequences of being identified as a separate body mind. And therefore, we seek or we desire pleasantness or happiness, and we fear or avoid unpleasantness or unhappiness. And the stage on which this drama is played out is space and time. So it's avoidance of pain, pursuance of pleasure, desire for life, fear of death, in space and time. That is the condition of the separate body mind identity. And this involves perpetual conflict and struggle. So, as long as you are identified as a separate body and mind, life is conflict and struggle. And the only way to end it is to end the identification with the body and the mind, to see that you're perfect, infinite, and eternal as the cosmos itself. And therefore, you have nothing to gain or to lose from experience, and therefore, fear and desire leave you unaffected, life and death leave you unaffected. And that is the end of conflict and struggle. But the trade off is you must lose your story, your separate identity, and in return, you get the end of struggle. So that's the trade off. If you want yourself, you have to want struggle along with it. If you're willing to lose yourself, you can be free of struggle. So that is the core dilemma of spirituality: to ego or not to ego, to identify with limitations or not to identify with limitations. So, in fact, it is when the struggle becomes unbearable that these matters are explored, of identity and spirituality and God and existence and philosophy, consciousness. So, struggle is the greatest teacher ultimately. Struggle leads to enlightenment. Struggle leads to suffering, suffering leads to enlightenment. Let's talk more about this later.